So my name's Ellie Lum. I run a business called Klum House, which you all know. And we are a bag design studio, education space, and we also sell bag making kits and supplies. We're based out of Portland, Oregon, but we sell bag making kits and supplies and classes all around the world. So today we're gathering, and I'm going to talk about the Slabtown backpack design process, which is our newest pattern release. It's not just a pattern, but a whole making experience. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit too. I think it's really cool to see the story behind how products come to life. It's one of the core values of Klum House, as you all can tell, because we make products that you also make too. So there's this really great collaboration between you all, your skills, and us. But we put a lot of thought behind the making experience that we want to ensure that you'll have. And we really care about you enjoying it and your success rate. So I'm going to get into how some of those design decisions are made. But first, let's just make sure folks are hearing me. And
so we'll just go quickly through the Klum House team folks who are here and let you know who we are and specifically like what our role was in creating the Slabtown backpack. So I'll quickly go first. My name is Ellen. I do all the marketing and communications at Klum House. So social media, newsletters, blog posts, and that sort of thing. And then I also, for the Slabtown backpack, am a copywriter. So I did a lot of like the technical writing of the instructions in the instructions booklet, and then play a big role in the actual marketing of the Slabtown and how we share it online and on our website once it was live. So that's me. I'm gonna go ahead and spotlight you, Kath, so you can introduce yourself. I'm gonna unmute you and spotlight your video.
There we go.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Kath, and I'm the graphic designer here at Klum House. So my specific role in regards to Slabtown is I'm the person who takes the copy, takes the feedback from Ellie, and has to compile it into a hopefully comprehensive booklet, complete with illustrations that describe all the 3D nuance of making this object. I also do the photography, and I do a lot of, I do the photography for the products, and I do the styling for the online classes and any other kind of marketing visual materials. And that's my role.
thanks, Kath.
Thank you, Kath. Okay, Katie, let's see. I'm gonna spotlight you. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Katie. I am a kind of auxiliary member of the Klum House team. I actually am the producer for the Klum House online class. That's sort of my specialization. And I also do a lot of tech editing. So I don't look at the pattern at all until it's at a point where it's kind of manageable, and I look at it with fresh eyes and write a lot of notes. And beyond that, I just am a big lover of Klum House and do all kinds of other little stuff like writing blog posts and things sometimes.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
All right.
You spotlighted me. All right. Yeah. Well, let's get into it. Let me just do a little bit of an overview of the whole design process. When I first conceive of a bag that I'm gonna sell as a kit or a pattern, I first have to actually design the bag. So that's the first phase, is me really trying out the bag design process and trying different techniques and what pockets do I want it to have, what hardware do I want it to have. So there's this really long concepting phase there, and it's iterative too. So when I used to be able to teach in-person classes before we were in quarantine and before the pandemic, I would use those in-person classes to teach different phases of the design of a bag. And by then the bag was pretty much finished too. Sometimes I would take it back and I would rework it and develop it. So there's that whole phase of designing the bag in that way. Then it goes on into designing the pattern. And that's when I work with Ellen, and we really look at how do the steps come together And I'm also continuing to problem solve, and that's when we bring in pattern testers in the very beginning and we see, okay, did what we write make sense to them? Are they able to follow this? And these are folks that we think are coming in at the level that the pattern is. And so we are assuming some base knowledge on a pattern like Slabtown that's a little more advanced. We also have a lot of discussions around what makes an advanced pattern and which techniques are in there and how long the project is. Then once we get the pattern writing pretty zipped up, then we go on and design the online class. So the online class is something that comes in after the pattern is pretty well designed, but there's always room for last minute changes until we go to print. So, and that happens all the time too. So then we're able to produce and film the class. Then we get into this other phase of designing how the pattern collection is going to be released. So when we release a pattern, not only do we release just that pattern, but we release the kits and we have to choose the colors. And we also release tools and supplies that go with it. So it's a whole matrix of things that really, at least for Slabtown, bumped the company up to this whole other level of really being able to fulfill our vision of giving the resources and supplies to makers like you so that you can really learn bag making. So that's kind of the overview of it. So let's go back to the first phase for a second. So when we think about designing bags, generally we think about designing bags that are bought in a store. So it's not really common to think about, okay, this bag is actually designed as a sewing pattern. So already that's really niche. So the big differences there are a lot of people design bags, and a lot of you maybe are small batch makers where you'll sell your bags to friends or on your own website or on Etsy or what have you. And so you're just handcrafting things. So your main goal when you're designing is you're designing for market. So you're looking at what does my customer want to use with this bag? Like what is the end use of it? What's the price point? All of that. So when I'm designing a bag, I'm actually designing it to teach you skills. So that's a whole nother like way of designing. So I design for education now. So let me step back just a little and say that I used to design for market. So I used to run a custom bag company called Reload Bags. It's a messenger bag company that's run out of Philadelphia. I used to be a bike messenger in Philadelphia, and my business partner that I ran that with, he still runs the company in Philly, and every bag was made to order. So we had small batch factories. We had one in Philly, one in Seattle. I ran one in San Francisco too. So I ran that company for a good part of 20 years. So I really got to know what makes a bag good and what makes it durable and what makes it hold up to heavy use. Because we were designing bags that messengers had to wear in East Coast winters all winter long and on the streets all day, every day. So we got really used to like durability was one of the main things we were looking for. And we had so many friends that were messengers too, so they would test stuff and we would really find out quick what parts of the bag were failing, how it would function in rain, what really made it comfortable to wear 8 hours a day. So I spent a lot of time throughout those years designing bags for market for a very specific use. So when I jumped over to designing bags for education, I took a lot of that bigger knowledge of how do you design for education, and I like kind of had to pivot a lot of my designs. And the Slabtown backpack was originally really inspired by a lot of the bag designs that I would do for Reload. Now, Reload used a lot of Cordura, nylon webbing, plastic buckles, Velcro. They don't really use zippers. So a lot of the materials that I designed for Reload were stuff that really stood up to hard wear and tear. Not that wax canvas and leather don't, but generally for performance wear, we go with these synthetic materials. But you can see a lot of odes to Reload design in the Slabtown backpack. Now, when I switched from designing for market for Reload to designing for education, I not only had to switch from two end uses, I had to switch from designing for industrial sewing machines to designing for home sewing machines. And that was a huge challenge for me, and I loved that challenge. It was a whole different ballgame of how do I design a bag that looks like it was professionally made in a factory, not that we all aren't professional stitchers in our own rights with the years of experience of stitching on our home sewing machine, because rightfully so, but with industrial equipment, where we really get this access to these larger, more powerful motors on machines, this walking foot, this ability for the machine to go through really thick layers, and also industrial snap presses. Just industrial equipment is really made to move quickly and to move really through really thick layers and just handle a lot of range of aspects of manufacturing. Home equipment, we tend to not have space for in our houses. We wouldn't really invest in because it's overkill for some of the stuff that we're doing. But how can we take a project and make it look professional, but still done on a home machine? So that is a huge part of the design process for Slabtown. So I'm going to get a little bit into some of that stuff as I go through some of the samples that I've done to get Slabtown to where it is right now. First, I'm going to go through the end product, show you where it ended up. Then we can kind of look backwards and you could say, oh, okay, I can see where she might have gotten that from, or I can see how she did that, but it ended up here. So let's just familiarize ourselves with the backpack first. And then we'll go and look at some of the very beginning samples that I have for it and ask questions along the way, okay? Because I'm really doing this talk for you all. I just really love to see people color in their knowledge of the whole process of making. Learning how to design something is not the same thing as building sewing skills. They're actually two different things. And often people think they put them together and they say, okay, well, I want to learn how to sew, so I'm going to, copy a shirt that I have, or I'm going to copy a bag that I have. Well, you're actually starting to get into design before you even actually learn the skills. So we're big believers that if you can build skills, then you'll start to build design knowledge as those skills are built. And then you can really bring those together to ultimately become the bag designer or bag maker that you hope to be. So let's look at a Slabtown finished bag, and go ahead and throw your questions in chat. I'll have Ellen rattle some off to me right now. Okay, so this is the Slabtown backpack. It's a roll top backpack, which is an ode to my design work with Reload. We did a lot of roll top backpacks. Roll top backpacks are really, really functional because they have two capacities, actually three if you have a halfway, but you're able to really cinch them down, pack them tight, but then you also have all this extra capacity, not to mention what can actually stick out the top, which was really common for us when we were messengers because we would deliver a lot of blueprints around town. So we'd be carrying these huge rolls of blueprints that would often be sticking out of the tops of our roll top bags. Okay, so we get this roll top capacity happening here. And then we have these, I hope you all can see this, we have these line 24 snaps. So that was an interesting addition to the design. I ended up switching this fastener kind of late in the design process, and I can talk about why. Then we have these side pockets here that have like a cargo capacity for if you want to put your drinks in there. So this is huge for me. I used to only ride my bike around. Actually, it was only until I moved to Portland that I really learned how to drive. So I didn't really learn how to drive until I was like 30 or 31. Before then, all I did was ride my bike and take public transportation, but also I grew up in cities. So that's, as those of you that live in cities know, that tends to be the way a lot of times. So yeah, so we have these two on the side. So there's a spot on this side if you want to drop your U-lock into it and drop your drink in there. And then we have this front pocket here, which has kind of a large capacity that you could just easy access throw stuff in. And then we have this side pocket here that's actually a hidden, it's not a pocket, this side zipper here that's actually a hidden access point to inside the main compartment of the bag. And this is actually the distinct feature that sets the final iteration of Slabtown apart from the original iteration of Slabtown that I used to teach in my workshops last year. So that's like my most proud feature of the bag. It was really fun to design. It was also really hard for me to design. It challenged me a lot because it was hard to figure out how to get it so that it could be a successful sew on a home sewing machine versus an industrial machine. Because at some point, the seams just get way too thick and your home machine won't go through it. So for me, I'm always like, how many layers can I get our home machines to push through before it's just not gonna have a high success rate on a wide variety of home sewing machines, and I need to change the sequence of construction. So that tends to be something that I have to balance and think about. Okay, so Slabtown also has a leather handle and leather backpack straps that are adjustable. And this is a really similar design down here with the buckle that we did in Maywood, but these are a new design, these straps here. There's a reinforcement layer on the bottom too. And it has this ability for you to do a two-tone colorway with some zipper pops, and then of course leather color and hardware color. So you get this whole design process. Even you as the maker, when you get the pattern from us, there's this whole other level of design that you get to do where you customize it yourself. You pick your colors, you pick, some people hack it a little bit and will add a pocket here or there. So there's a lot you can do where you can build off of the design yourself, which I love to see too.
Ellie, we have a couple of questions, some of which are speak directly to that, doing some extra level of customization. We have a couple folks asking about the possibility of adding like a hidden pocket on the back outside next to your back for carrying traveling papers, and then just in general being able to sort of add patch pockets and things like that on the inside of the bag, maybe for a laptop sleeve. You talk a little bit about if people want to like try to hack that themselves. If
like, do I suggest it, or are they actually looking for me to explain how to do it?
How do you envision that people might customize aside from colors? What about pockets?
I've seen people come up with a lot of different things, but this is a good question as a jumping off point to talk about iterative design. So let me park that question for a second, and let's just look a little bit at some of these samples that I've made to get to this final bag design. So the final bag design of Slabtown, it's final because it comes to all the goals that I have of the bag, which are really education-based goals because I designed for education. And also the goal, it just has so much to do with how does my design team, including Ellen, Katie, Kath, how do we make a bag making experience that has the highest level of success rate for the most amount of people? Okay, so it's really important to think about what is your goal for the end design. So we're essentially designing a making experience. We're focusing a lot on the design of the bag here, but I just want to be clear that there's so much more design happening with the making experience itself and the team and what we did together. But as far as the bag goes, I'm really looking at what level can people be at in their sewing career or their sewing identity or artistic life, where there's going to be a high level of success rate, and how can we add tools to that to help even bolster that even more, hence the online class coming for free with the full maker kit. Okay, so there's a lot of levels of different design processes that go into that. And one of the main things I'm always looking at is what access to tools do people have, and how much time do they have to make something, and what is gonna make it so they feel like they can actually do it, right? And so it's really, really intentional to go through a lot of these iterations of samples to see what's going to work and what isn't, including like how expensive is this end product going to be. So that relates to that question in a sense where the best way to essentially design or hack a design is to make samples and to make studies. So if I think, okay, I need some way for there to be an easy access zipper to the main compartment, I'm not going to expect myself to figure that out the first time I try to make it. And actually, even me, who at this point in my career are considered a master bag maker, I'm gonna make so many tries and mistakes to figure that out that it's never gonna be the first time. And actually, in my whole bag making career, I don't think I've ever made something truly correct for my end goal the first time I've tried. So the best thing to do is to actually try things out and see how it works before you commit to thinking that you're gonna do it right the first time. That's actually a secret of design. And if we don't give ourselves enough time to iterate a design and to do the R&D, which is the research and development, where you try the sample and then you go out and you make it, you go out and try it, you make it again, you go out and try it. It's that kind of stuff that really results in, I think, our satisfaction with our end product. Yeah, so let's go through a few things. This is just off-white canvas lining that I did a mock-up of when I was trying to concept out how to do, what was I looking at on this? I might have just been looking at some general shapes and pattern pieces. So one of the things I like to do is work on canvas lining, because I don't know if y'all can see that, but I'm writing on it. So pencil shows up really well on this. And I can write what the original dimensions of this pattern piece was, because the second that you sew something up, it's no longer the original dimensions that it was when you cut it because of seam allowance and stretch and whatever. So if I am really looking at and playing with, okay, how is this gonna construct up? I'll write what I guess is, and I'll usually draft directly onto my lining fabric, what I think I might wanna do. And that way, when it sews up, I have an idea that how it wants. Oh yeah, this is what I was working on. So this is access to the main compartment. Like I said, I got like really obsessed with trying to figure this out. I must have made like 20 samples or something of only trying to figure this out. So Slabtown has probably had like 50 samples, and I might be like, there might be more than that, because there's so many aspects to the design that had to be figured out. And I couldn't tackle all aspects of the design in one sample, so I would pick something and I would say, okay, ignore every other part of the design and figure this part of the design out. How is this part gonna work? And this is the most complicated part of the design, so I just had so many samples for it. Yeah, so this is something I think I ended up not being able to come up with a way to explain to everyone how to finish the very top part of the zipper here without a raw edge in a way that seemed to me would have a really high success rate, right? Because when I used to design reload bags, I designed bags for professional stitchers to make, for people that spent 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, sewing something in a factory with access to professional equipment. When I'm designing for home-based makers like you all, I'm not assuming that there's professional equipment or knowledge happening for every step of the way. So I really don't want a little fiddly or finicky part of the design in the bag if I can help it. So one thing about sewing is the more iterations and samples you take your design through, the cleaner and simpler your design gets. And it will, if you have a really well-designed garment or bag, it sews up in this like really flowy way, like not flowy fabric wise, but you get in this flow state of making that thing, because every time you do it, you're like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. You know, so I think when you're sewing something, you know, when there's a point in that construction process that you're like, why did I do it this way? Either I don't know enough, or the pattern maker didn't actually take their iterations far enough. That happens all the time. We're in this culture where everything is so fast and we want results and we want to see things, but really if we don't spend time with our designs and we iterate them, we don't get to this really beautiful end result as easily or as much. Now, I want to do a little disclaimer and say that sometimes a design is never done. You put it out, you find out other things about it, and then you reiterate. Like if you think about like the iPhone or whatever, like how many versions are we on right now? Like inevitably things get updated as they get used and released into the world. And that's not going to stop me from saying, okay, this is done enough for now, let me release it. But I might bring something back and say, oh, this can actually be done better now. I have more skills now, or I have access to different resources that weren't available at the original design process. So I think it's really important, as much as it is to iterate, it's also important to let go and let your design be and function in the world too. Okay, so that was a little tangent. So this is one of the first concepts of me trying to get this in. I scrapped it, it didn't work. This is another sample where I was still trying to get this dang side zipper in here. And it ended up just being like too many pieces, too complicated. I know this is like, as you can tell too, this is just like regular canvas. I'm just using like less expensive materials to play with the design and stuff. I was playing with like tag placement and also playing with an extra zipper cover piece here. But as you can see right here, I have there's 2 seams right there. And it was just like overkill with the amount of seams and pieces there. Let's look inside here. Oh yeah, so then we get to this other point here again, where I couldn't figure out how to get everyone to finish the inside of the bottom of the zipper in a way that felt like it had some integrity and a high success rate for a large amount of people. So you can also see that in this design, the way that I did the side zipper here, it didn't allow me to put a side pocket on both sides, and the bag felt unbalanced, so I scrapped that. Let me go back to like one of the original Slabtown designs. This is more of a concept. I was trying to figure out, I was really stuck on how can the roll top have multiple places to snap into on the side of the bag. So this used to have different D-rings in it. And I was like, oh, it'll be a clip, and you can clip onto each D-ring. So, but then it ended up looking like really like overkill for leather and hardware. And then I also realized that maybe it doesn't need to have like all of these different choices of where to clip into. Like the bag can be just one clip, and it's either like full or not full, and it's not gonna unclip itself. And yeah, so this is just me playing with like, is it important for it to have all these different spots to cinch down to? And I realized it isn't. And then this is just playing with a double pocket on the front, where this is like a larger pocket and it's a huge compartment there. And then this is a smaller pocket that's attached to that outside of the larger pocket. So you get these 2 levels of pockets where there's a large one and a small one. And so that was me like kind of trying to problem solve this like large zipper, and then these like sort of side pockets there. And then this has a line 24 snap. And then this is the beginnings of looking at how do backpack straps work for this bag. This is like a funny like cutout of leather where I was just playing with different ways to do padding. And this is, instead of a buckle, line 24 snaps to adjust the backpack. Just playing with, oh, and then these are copper rivets, which I decided were a little overkill for the design. And plus we had already introduced tubular rivets, which are really strong. We introduced them in Maywood. So I wanted to stay consistent with skill building with you all, so that you are building skills on tubular rivets with Maywood, you can continue to use those skills on Slabtown. This is a version of Slabtown that I actually did have for a pretty long time. I used to teach this version of Slabtown in my in-person classes. So let me just talk about one thing that really changed here. I don't know if you all could see these like metal loops here. Those are actually attached to the bag with a webbing. And then the leather is wrapping around the metal loops so that basically I wanted to attach the straps and I realized it was too hard to sew. It was too thick to sew through the leather. So I added a junction point where I could attach the webbing and then I could attach the leather to the webbing with that loop there. But I ended up kind of realizing that I thought it was okay so I was also having a moment a lot with this because I didn't think it would be super comfortable. And so I was like, I don't want to design a bag that I don't think people will ultimately be that comfortable wearing. So I didn't want to design Slabtown with just leather straps. It took me a really long time to figure out what to do, but then I sort of came up with using felt. And then it took me a long time to figure out how to get felt onto the straps in a way that I felt like would be durable and easy for people to do. So I actually originally had almost written instructions to hand sew, like saddle stitch the felt onto the straps, which I actually think is still really cool. But then I realized I would need to develop a whole genre of supportive education about saddle stitching, which was not a part of the Klum House skill matrix already. And Slabtown had already really introduced so many new skills that I wanted an easy way for people to attach padding and make the straps more comfortable if they wanted to. So I ended up going with what we released with, which is glue and tubular rivets, which ended up working really, really well. But I was really stuck on not wanting people to just wear strap. Lo and behold, I've worn my bag with leather straps for months now, and it's fine, and it's totally comfortable. But I was just making this assumption and getting really stuck on this aspect of the design. And it made it so that it was hard to move forward until I totally was like, I'm just gonna do this. This is great, it's fine, it'll work. So there's things like that that end up happening too. So that's where this came from, is me like really trying to get these straps to be comfortable, sewing this webbing on it. The other thing I was really starting to get stuck on is trying to get people to sew leather as they were making Slabtown. So that's something that I decided to save for a future bag design pattern where we really just focus on sewing leather on a home sewing machine. So watch out for patterns like that. I'm like really concepting stuff like that right now. I didn't want to throw that skill just sort of on to a bag design that already had so many skills in it. I really wanted to highlight it as a major part of the design. So I decided to let that go too. Let me talk about one other part of the design that I think is really interesting. One of my favorite ways for a roll top bag, the shape for a roll top bag to have, and this is personal preference, is I really like this curve, this like half moon shape at the top of the bag. Now I know that there's a lot of roll top bag designs where a strap will come around the front or two straps will come around the front, and reload bags are like that too, and they'll clip. But for me, like I just really like the classic clean lines of really being able to get this art shape on the top. So that's another aspect of design and making, and those of you watching, which is everyone, are designers and makers to a certain degree. So you know that your personal aesthetic preference really makes its way into your designs. So you sort of have this like combination of who are you designing for, what are your end goals, which I talked about, market or education. And then you're looking at also what's your style? What do you actually like? What are you drawn to? And then you also have another aspect, which is what's your access to resources, equipment, machinery, materials, and whatnot, including skills and mentorship or whatever. So I feel like you're always sort of in that triangle of things, and whatever you create comes out of really those three aspects. So yeah, that's a big thing for me. So because I really like the bag to have this shape, then I really like the roll top to connect down on the sides. that's just a big thing for me. So in order for that to do that, the bag has to have some sort of stiffener along the top in order to make it so that when you do fold it down, you get that shape and it doesn't just collapse. Well, when I originally, the first iteration of Slabtown, I had that being sewn on. And again, there were so many different machines that I tested it on, and not a lot of them, it was like half and half where the machines would actually sew the leather and the fabric. And that's just too high of a rate of possible not success that I had to come up with a different way to do that. So I'm really happy with how it turned out on the final one, where we were able to just use this piece of leather here, the roll top strap, as a way to, as almost like a washer for all the hardware that we attach, but also as a way to get this stiffener into the top of the bag. And then I realized too that it didn't need to be attached the whole way across. There was not really much pros and cons that I could think of to have this have little gaps from the fabric and the leather. So I had to think outside of the box in that sense for myself, where I was under this impression that, oh, it needed to be attached the whole way across the top of the bag, but really it didn't. So there's all these little epiphanies there. Let me show you one more thing, and then I'm going to get into designing the pattern and do some questions.
Yeah, it's 18 minutes till 1, and we do have some questions coming up in the chat.
Okay, so let me talk about one more thing, and that's this fastener here. It's called a button stud, and I absolutely love it. And I don't have another thing, but basically like a hole in the leather goes on it, and it's really, really easy to take off and on. So when I originally designed the when I designed the Slabtown recently, I had this button stud in the design up till pretty much almost the last minute because it's so easy to use. And I was like, wow, one of my main things is to design non-fussy things. So I was like, wow, this is so not fussy and so easy to use. Like you can just like pop the leather on and it stays. The thing is though, is it was wearing into the leather and it was popping off really easily. So this was a fastener that was part of the design up until almost the last minute. And I just realized like, oh my God, this is such a major part of the bag, like staying shut. The fact that these stay on here, that I just couldn't leave them on. But I actually didn't want to use line 24 snaps to begin with. The reason is if you're setting them with a hand setter, they take a little bit more finesse to set straight and correctly than other fasteners that I had used up to this point. And I get really sensitive about, are people going to have a high success rate setting this hardware? Because I know that hardware is one of the new skills that people gain when they're making Klum House bags. So luckily we came up with some really good techniques and really tried to help explain to people how to set line 24 snaps with the hand tools. I ordered and tested probably like 10 to 15 hand tools. And we also came up with an ability or a little hack to put double-sided tape on the dot anvil to help the cap not slip. So then I felt comfortable that we were supporting people to do these fasteners, and I really wanted to teach this fastener because it's so versatile and such a great fastener for bag making that I was really excited to introduce it. So let's get some questions. I think I've talked about mostly all like the design points of the bag that took a lot of pivots.
Yeah, there have been some good questions popping up in the chat as you were talking. Someone was asking about whether or not you sketch your bag designs first, or if you just jump right into making samples with canvas.
You know, I wish I sketched my bag designs first, and that's because I wish that I liked to sketch. But my sketches are literally so crude that they're just like rectangles and measurements. Like kind of all sketch, and I'm always like, maybe I'll be the kind of designer that has beautiful sketches someday. But for my process, not a ton. The main thing for me is to leave myself breadcrumbs of measurements and things that I'm trying and changing. Yeah. So lots of notes, because like I said, something that starts out as like 10 inches ends up when it's sewn at 9 or 9 3/4, and you need to know what you cut at if you like your final design.
It's kind of like you're sketching in 3 dimensions, actually. It's like you're just such a tangible designer that you jump right into the shapes of it.
Yeah, like this here has sketches on it. Like there's like 2 different pencil colors on it, and like dimensions that are like crossed out and written over again. So like this is my version of sketching.
Cool. There was also a question that I saw a little while back. Someone was asking about sourcing materials such as leather and hardware and tools, and I'm not sure if they were referring to where they personally can source them, in which case we sell a bunch of it on our website, which we can talk about. But the question might have also been about in your design process, like how do you go about sourcing?
Oh yeah, well I have a lot of wholesale accounts. I buy things in bulk. So those wholesale accounts allow me to buy samples where I don't have to buy like 1,000 or 2,000. So I'm like, I want to try this buckle, and I'll buy just 1 or 2 or samples. So I tend to have just a lot of different hardware in the studio and different pieces that I get to just try things out with. And yes, we do sell a ton of hardware and leather and supplies on our site.
And what would you suggest to people getting started and trying to find sources? It seems like she might be asking about kind of like bulk supplies, because we do sell a lot of the individual supplies and some hardware in bulk on our site. But I guess, yeah, going beyond that and going direct to the source.
Yeah, so you usually need a business license, because they won't let you buy from the sources that I use. They won't let you buy if you don't have like a UBI number or something. And then for me, I'll usually do a shit ton of research. I mean, when I'm sourcing for a pattern, I'm up every day, probably like 4 or 5 a.m. until about 9 a.m. doing sourcing research. There's really no rhyme or reason there. I, again, have been in the sewing and manufacturing industry for over 20 years. So I have a lot of sources I worked with when I did reload stuff, and I have new sources that I find every day, and they just come from really random places and a ton of Google searching.
Someone also asked about pattern testers and sort of how that process works, and if we seek out testers from like a wide range of skill levels for our bags.
It depends on the skill level that we're designing for that particular pattern. So I wouldn't necessarily look for a beginner pattern tester for Slabtown, because I'm looking at it to be an intermediate or advanced pattern. Pattern testing is actually, it's actually quite a skill, I would say. A lot of times people, when they're making a pattern, their goal is to make the project correctly. That is not the goal when you're testing a pattern. The goal when you're testing a pattern is to really see how you could make the project wrong, because the pattern maker needs to know where are people going to mess up. But a lot of non-experienced pattern testers, and sometimes we do use crowdsourced pattern testing, which I think is really, really great too. It depends on what we're looking for in the pattern testing. So if I'm really looking for how does this complex technique really travel through iteration-wise, Kat's illustrations, Ellen's copy, are we just overlooking something really obvious? You know, so we have testers that do like heavy tech edits, like Katie, for instance, who has so much experience making patterns and designs in her own right, and also working professionally in the sewing industry and seeing a lot of patterns too. So we're looking at what are sewers usually looking at when they're following a pattern. So what's a standard? How can we break the rules in a way but still actually get people to follow along what we're trying to do? Did Kath make an illustration in a dimension that just doesn't translate to what we're trying to do? Or is there a sentence that needs different grammar? So we have pattern testers that are like really, that are book editors that are looking at grammar. We have pattern testers that are tech editors that are also teachers. And sometimes we do crowdsource with a lot of our influencers and folks that are in the community that are part of Klum House. The greater community of Klum House will definitely get our patterns ahead of time. And sometimes we do put out a call. We really love feedback, and we really want to see if there's a high success rate on our patterns, because our main goal is to make something that supports your joy and your making process. So that's something we care about so much. So we do so much testing, and there's all these different places where that testing happens.
Yeah, someone's asking, how can I become a pattern tester and get notified when you want testers? So we tend to, when we're in the process of designing a new pattern, which we might be in the coming weeks or months, depending on how things go, we generally, if we're doing a public call for testers, a really good thing to do is join our newsletter list, because we'll always put out a little application link in our newsletter if that's the case. Follow us on social media. We'll put it there as well. Yeah, it's really incredibly useful to work with testers. And actually, a lot of our testing happens, the very first testing happens in in-person workshops also, which Ellie talked about, how our designs start in workshops, and getting to observe so many students in the workshop setting actually making the bag can be really informative, seeing where they mess up and how we can prevent that.
Yeah, so with workshops, I just want to clarify, a lot of times people sign up for workshops to actually get bag making education from me. They will sign up to make the object itself, but there's this huge draw of really understanding how construction works, different materials, what they're particularly doing wrong or right, or how they can really improve. They get an interaction with me and my eyes on them making. So I just want to make sure that people know that difference, and why someone might be taking a bag making workshop where the bag isn't totally finished for commercial selling on the site, where I don't get this really hands-on interaction with the person and their making process. So it is a little bit looser from the bag pattern design perspective in a class, because I'm really in this dialogue with the student about their skill building.
Right. Have you thought about doing a vegan version of your bags? This is a question we get sometimes about a non-leather option.
Yeah. So
why do you work with the materials that we work with?
So I think this goes into this other part of the design process of like designing the actual collection. So personally, for the capacity of the company, it takes a lot of resources for us financially and spatially to develop and to hold all of the different materials. So if we were to expand into a whole other genre of materials, it would require a bunch more square footage and just financial resources for the company. So for us, we feel like if someone wants to go that direction, they can get there if they buy the pattern, because the pattern is the blueprint for making it, and they could buy the fabric and they could buy the hardware and all the tools. The only thing they would have to do differently is source their vegan leather from a different manufacturer and use the instructions to cut their own leather, and then they could jump on. But the online class is great. You could still make a vegan bag with that, all the supplies in the supply shop, all the tools, including all of the fabric. The wax canvas is vegan.
Yeah, and we have had a couple makers successfully source their own vegan leather, like 3/4 inch strips. There are some shops that sell it on Etsy, and if you just do a little bit of research online, there are some good sources for that.
Yeah, it's really just the leather straps that you need to switch out.
Yeah.
And sell all the tools for you to cut your own straps, and it works with vegan leather too.
Yeah. Katie wanted to add something about testing. We go back to that for a sec.
Great.
Yeah, just real quick. I've worked for a bunch of different sewing pattern companies. I worked for Craftsy and for Colette, and the word pattern tester is used in different ways depending on who you're hearing it from within like the greater sewing industry. And when you get like the little notification on Instagram, like, oh, like we're looking for testers, a lot of the time that pattern is pretty well developed. right? It's at the point where, because I'm currently pattern testing for a company in Australia, and really their pattern testing, what they mean is make the pattern, I want to see how it looks on a person with your measurements. And when I do pattern testing for Klum House, it is like, sorry, they're doing construction outside. It's like months and months before anybody knows that the pattern exists. And really it is what we called at Seamwork and Colette tech editing, right? Where really it's going through every little piece and just knowing, and I've taught enough, and I know Ellie and I know everybody and how we want things to kind of come across at Klum House, where I'll be like, oh, there's a spot where someone's totally going to get stuck, or, oh, this wording doesn't make sense to me. Maybe if we did it this way. Or even just like the coloring on this is supposed to be right side, not wrong side on this diagram. So just to keep that in mind as you're hearing people talk about pattern testing sort of in the sewing world in general, it's very different and it varies depending on the company. That's all.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left here. Let's see, Julia asked, she says, all your bags have this specific Klum House style. When did you develop this? Before starting the business or along the way, bag by bag?
I would say it's along the way. And part of that is because I'm designing stuff for, I'm hoping that that someone makes our pattern once and then they want to make another one and another one. So I'm pretty conscious of how much stuff you all need to buy, really, even to make something, and how familiar you are at learning how to use the materials. So, and anyone that works at Klum House can totally pipe into this too. But from an education standpoint, it's really important when you build skills to build them on top of each other, right? Because the best learning comes when you can bring in prior knowledge and then leverage up with a little bit more knowledge. So if I am using the same materials and the same techniques, which honestly are just ways that I think and ways that I design, right? Because these are all my designs. So inevitably you're going to see this common thread there. But what's behind those designs is me really being intentional about what I've already taught you in a previous pattern level and what I want to add on to that. So it's like, if you know my double turn hem, then you're like, okay, cool, got that. You know, or if you know my fold 2 line, you know, or you know how we use washers and all of that, then you're like, okay, I got that. So that when you do a new design, you're like, I got that. Oh, wait, this is new, right? So the success level becomes a lot higher. So that's really intentional there too. And also personally, I really like clean, non-fussy designs. So those are just main tenets and values for me. And I'm referring back to that as I design. I'm like, is this the least amount of seams that it needs to be? Is this not fussy? So I like to really clean things up, and I don't like a ton of seams in the stuff that I make. So you'll see that it's minimal, yet it can still be complex. And I think there's some beauty in that.
Great, we're just about at 1 o'clock.
So folks can stick around a little while longer, but I want to go through a little bit of the pattern design process because I just think it's really fascinating and something that a lot of companies don't talk about. But if you need to dip out, this is going to be recorded and the recording will be sent to you. So you can always say, oh, well, I left at 1, but I missed this pattern part. Let me just watch that or something, you know, so no big deal there. You'll have access. But let me just show you one thing that we all think is kind of hilarious. But this is called a step out for pattern making and for pattern writing. And what this is something that I will make versions of the bag when it's time for Ellen and Kath to write the pattern with me. And on this is for Kath actually. So Kath is the designer. She makes all the illustrations. And being a designer, and which is super helpful, she thinks like really 3-dimensionally too, and she needs to think really 3-dimensionally. She needs a 3-dimensional object to make those complex illustrations in that pattern, because she's really looking at what are we trying to communicate in the design and what angle is someone looking at this thing at. So you'll see this here is step 6, edge stitch. And then this says start stitch here. So essentially, if Kat's making the illustration for this, she's gonna know, okay, if someone is stitching this and this, she might draw the stitch line with an arrow going this direction. And then, so this is really, as if anyone joining this has made Slabtown knows that this front panel construction is really this magical construction process of the pattern itself. And it sort of is like, I'm not quite sure what's going on, but let me just follow those threads and hope that I end up getting somewhere with it. And it's through Ellen's copywriting and cast illustrations that you build that trust that you are going to get there to what that bag's going to look at like. So I'm actually going to spotlight Kath for a second and just see if she has anything to add to that stuff, because it's kind of ridiculous what happens here and where we end up.
It is ridiculous. That is the absolute word for it. I feel like, I mean, personally for me as a designer, I'm quite dyslexic anyway. So when I read some of this copy, or I read where it starts and it's using language like flip the thing upside down, inside out, underside, and sew the back end of it to the blah, blah, blahs. And I can't digest that as a dyslexic person. So part of my role really is to figure out how do I take all that really, really subtle information and try and crunch it down to the most simple visual way through an illustration, which actually manages to say with that one particularly, I don't know if you guys can see this.
Yeah, right.
Which like manages to show what's a layer, what's got shadow underneath it, and what involves flipping a certain piece to the other side or something. So there's a lot of kind of like intuitive subtlety that I can only figure out between the copy, between having this physical object where I'm like, oh, that's what she means if I do this, this, and this. And then that's got to go through this filter of becoming a 2D rendering that describes something very 3D. So it's such a weird process. And I feel like, I don't know, Ellie, how many illustrations do we make before one gets selected? It's ridiculous.
We go a lot through it. And I would say too, one of the cool things about this too is like, of course, Kat's not the one designing the bag. So it's really cool that she actually doesn't know how the bag design came to be, because I'm coming in to her and instructing her, making certain assumptions that someone might already know something because I've already lost that beginner mind about it. So then she comes in and she's like, wait, this doesn't make sense at all. So, and able to like really say, okay, how do we make this make sense to someone? So Kat has to actually think about things almost to the point of what are your bodies doing physically? What are your arms doing physically? What orientation is your work at any given point when you're looking at your work? So she is actually really channeling you all making this project and thinking, what does the spatially, what's happening with these materials? How do they visually transform when you move on to this next step? So, and she's doing this all like kind of in her head. She doesn't make a bag along with making the instructions, although her and Ellen do make a bag design before they start working on the instructions. So they get the big picture of where we're gonna end up.
It's still a mystery, but it's great.
I wish that I had some of the old like edited versions of the instructions to show folks. We've showed them on Instagram. I think there are some pictures on our blog, but truly it's a messy process of writing the instructions and doing the illustrations. And it's so many iterations. I think the Slabtown instructions booklet went through 10 or 11 like official drafts, where each time we did a big edit, gathered feedback either from myself or other tech editors. And then Kath went through and integrated all of that feedback. And then we did that again, like almost a dozen times probably before, and even down to the like last hour before we sent it to print, we were finding tiny little things where we're like, oh my God, how did we not see that? We've read this 100 times.
Well, and there's one mistake that we didn't find. where we
oh, that's right.
and then we had to print a little mistake bookmark, and we were all just like, oh my God, how could we not have seen that? And that's on page 20. Oh, now I can't remember, but the annotation for the step number says like 5, and then it jumps to 7, and the little step 6 I think is missing, even though the step itself is not missing.
Yeah.
It's just the annotation of the step. So then we printed little mistake bookmarks and threw them in there because we had already gone to print, even though we had literally, we call it grammar time, gone so many times through, but when you start to read it so many times, you just can't see things anymore.
Yeah, there's always something. And of all things that could have been a mistake, that one wasn't so bad. So we'll take it, but we'll switch it on the next time we go to print.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Anita says, I have some of the old Slabtown instructions and I purchased the final new one because I knew it would be so much better.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, the old ones still totally work, and they make a different bag that looks kind of similar, but
right.
Features are a little different. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any other new questions. Jean says perfection angers the gods.
It does. Yeah. What angers the gods? Sorry.
Perfection.
Yeah.
We're always talking about trying to kill our inner perfectionists at Klum House and embrace the mistakes because it's just part of the process.
Yeah, it really is. And also I think that, at least from an education perspective, the more mistakes you make, the more you remember what you learned too.
Jack was asking, can we buy a kit without the instructions? Because he's bought multiple kits, and so he doesn't need the instruction booklet every time. Yeah, and I can speak quickly to this, is just that this is something that we're aware of it, and we're working on troubleshooting it and updating the way the products function on the website so that that instructions booklet will be optional in the future, so that if you already have it, you don't need another one.
And for now, if you just want to like save paper and save resources, you're welcome to email us and say, hey, I just put an order in. It's order number this or that, and I don't need the instruction booklet, and we won't throw it in.
Yeah. Do you want to do one more question, or do you want to wrap it up?
I can do one more and then I'll wrap it up.
Okay. Would you consider selling hardware in bulk for small makers?
We are developing that program right now. Yep, small batch makers, bulk, bulk purchases and stuff. It's a little on the back end. It's just a little bit for us to figure out, because we need to add those bulk purchases on to our purchase, because often we have a small studio and we don't have a lot of space to hold a lot of materials, and financially it's hard for us to carry a ton of stuff like that. So we try to really time it up. So we're working on what that ordering process looks like for folks. And there is definitely, if you do order in bulk, there are ways to get price breaks. And I do know that not everyone's gonna, have the access to the suppliers that I've built up over the past 20 years. So I definitely am aware that that is something that people want. Yeah. In the meantime, you're welcome to email and we can look at what you're interested in getting. And the essential tools. And yeah, thanks for joining us. And yeah,
Thanks, everybody.
Love everyone. I just want to say that. I know it's like, but I just love that everyone cares so much to give their hour of time to me and my team to talk about stuff that we're so passionate about. And I just love that we share that passion. So thank you so much for joining us.
And we do have plans to do more live interactive talks like this on a regular basis. And we're just beginning to look at what that's going to look like in the weeks to come. So stay tuned for that too. There'll be more of this. Anna says lunch hour is good. Yeah, we think so too. We kind of like this idea of like a lunchtime get together.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.